Hello, it's a short explanation about a key concept in sociology, culture and cultural relativity. So, looking at culture first of all, culture is a contested concept, so it can be defined in a number of ways, and sociologists vary in their explanations of what culture means. But essentially, culture refers to the norms and values of a group. So it refers to norms, social norms, what we accept in behaviour in ourselves and others, what we expect in terms of behaviour of ourselves and others. So, for example, we have social norms for social class. It's very normal to have private property and the concept of private property. Age, very normal to consider youth, middle-aged and older people to behave in different ways. Gender, we expect different behaviour from males, females, and we accept some of the kind of sides of that. Sexuality as well. Ethnicity and race have shaped how we expect different groups of people from different ethnic backgrounds to behave. So culture relates to social norms, what we accept and expect. It relates to values, what we consider important, what we believe is worthwhile behaviour, what we think is desirable. So they're like the bigger beliefs and thought systems around norms. Because we believe private property is important, and that is enshrined in our law. So if you put a coin on a table and someone takes it without your permission, then even if it's very small, just 2 pence, that is in principle theft under the law. It's taken without permission. That is the actus reus of theft. And so what we have is this whole set of beliefs about that. So we have the norm of private property, enshrined in our law, and there's a whole belief system around private property that we have, meritocracy, the belief in working hard and your ability being recognised and your effort being shown in your status and so on. So there's all these beliefs about health, hygiene, which are the reason why we have norms to do with not wearing, shoes into certain places in the home, for example. So it's the values around and the beliefs around norms that are an important part of culture. Now, that said, there are two main categories for definitions of culture. One main category is an inclusive definition of culture. So an inclusive definition of culture includes every group's way of life. And so to say any group's way of life is their culture. That can be seen as fairly meaningless by some critics. They would say it's too vague and it's too broad. And so there is the exclusive definition of culture, and that relates to the idea that only certain social groups' way of life can be considered culture. So the inclusive definition of culture is associated with Williams. It says the way of life of a group. The exclusive definition of culture is associated with F.R. Leavis. And Leavis argued that the culture of the elite group was the most desirable culture. Their way of life, their lifestyle, their activities, the arts, literature, music, from that group was the one that needed to be preserved. Those forms of culture needed to be protected. So like the idea of the kind of canon of human wisdom and production. So that would be associated with the high culture, the high culture definition. So that's saying that culture could be defined in different ways by different groups, depending on which groups are included. Cultural relativity is also known as the social construction argument. Cultural relativity argues that there are variations between groups in terms of culture. Variations between groups in terms of culture tend to be affected by time, space, and context or situation. So we can say that the beliefs and values of a culture or a social group are related to a time in history, a place or geographical location, but also a context or situation. So take an example of each one. So in terms of history and time, the beliefs and values of norms of groups, going back to the ancient Greeks, Islamic societies in ancient times, Chinese societies, medieval England. If we look at history, we can see how norms have changed over time. So clearly culture is not fixed, it's related to time. And also geography. If we look at the Ik tribe, IK, the Ik tribe, they're a fascinating case study of what can happen to a group when it undergoes severe famine, deprivation, a struggle for survival that's very harsh. They were relocated to make way for a national park as a tribe, and they were a nomadic tribe. So, according to a book by Turnbull about the Ik tribe, they had a very, very, what we might call a cultureless existence, but basically they had great differences in terms of their behaviour. Their behaviour in terms of family life and parenthood, love, compassion, they seem to lack many of the qualities we might consider normal or civilised. So again, it's place and geography that can affect culture. Also situation, the context in which behaviour takes place can affect our beliefs about the behaviour, whether we consider it normal, whether we value and consider it important or worthless, or desirable or undesirable. So for example, nudity and nakedness, if it's in a private room, it might be perfectly normal for someone as an individual to be without clothing, but then obviously once they're with a stranger, it creates a whole different view of the situation, which means that people might consider it undesirable behaviour. But again, there's some groups that might consider that desirable. So culture varies across groups, and it's related to time, space and situation. The cultural relativity argument could be used to support the view that it's nurture and not nature that shapes behaviour. So the cultural relativity argument could be used to support the view that rather than being biologically determined in our behaviour is not determined by genetics and inheritance alone, but largely by the way in which our behaviour is shaped by the social environment and the physical environment. The way in which we're nurtured, the way in which we're socialised, the type of resources on offer as well. So that explains the behaviour of human beings. And that's been a big debate in the past, because obviously in the past people have argued that race is the reason for differences in education and attainment, culture is the reason for differences in education and attainment. It's probably more complex than that, but that's the area that we can go into and explore further with these kinds of ideas as a starting point. If you do have any questions, email daniel_butcher@hotmail.co.uk.